Good.
Oh, hello there. How goes it? I'm just touching up one of my small straight blade pocket knives here, and I thought today we would do a video for all you folks on the Sugar Creek Forge build along. Now I know that most of you, maybe not all of you, but a lot of you have pretty much finished your knives now to the point where you're putting on the handles, you're putting on different blade finishes, and I'm going to show you some of the different ways that I put on the finishes. Now my way may not be the best way, it may not be the right way, but it's the way I do it, and it's always worked for me, and I think it works quite well. We're also going to go down to the shop here in a little bit, and I'm going to show you some very easy to make tools. Also very cheap. You can make these tools in some cases for no money at all. $5, $10. Probably the most you'd spend on any of them total would be 25 bucks. So we're not talking much money here. And certainly I think for a very casual knife builder, you know, someone like me. Now, and something I want to correct too, I've very generously heard two people refer to me as a professional. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination. You know, people like Kylie are professionals. People like Murray Carter, those are professional knife makers. I am a hobbyist. I just mess around with things, try to do things and see what works. And so without further ado, let's get into some of the things that have worked for me. I guess the first thing you have to do is plan out exactly what kind of finish you want. And I'll go over some of the pros and cons of each. A brushed finish or a satin finish, as you've heard it referred to, that finish is probably the easiest, I think, to maintain, because if you plan on using your knife in the field, it is absolutely the one I would recommend. Excuse me, if you're going to use a knife, perhaps you made it for wood carving, or perhaps you made a kitchen knife. In those cases, especially with carbon knives, I like a mirror polish, and the reason I do is it just resists rust better, it's easier to clean, and it can be a lot of fun to do. It takes time, and that's the one overriding factor that I think you're going to find is none of this is hard. You just have to be willing to put in the time to do what you want to do and get the finish that you want. So we're going to start out and go with a brushed finish, because that's kind of on the way to a mirror polish. One tip I will give you is, even if you have a buffer, and I'm going to show you how to build an extremely cheap one, a buffer is used right at the end and very little. To get a really good polish. Some of you may have seen the knives I did for Waco just recently. I think he put them up in a video. And there is very little buffer time on those at all. It was mostly right at this bench and with sandpaper. And for those of you that don't want to buy anything, of course, you have to buy some sandpaper. I'm sorry I can't get you away from that. But that's pretty much really the only tool that you need. Now, Mary, are we focused where we can see these? This obviously is not a small pocket knife. This is the CKC Persian that I got from Kylie, and I ordered it without handles. I'm going to put my own on, and obviously this knife will be a display knife and a showpiece. I don't have many of those, but this certainly will be one. So this will get a full mirror polish. This little one actually belongs to my wife, and it was just a regular ground finish when I got it, and the handle areas were a little rough, and this was I guess I'll call it a mass-produced custom by John Greco, and I love his knives. His designs are beautiful, they're good quality, but to make them at a decent price, he cranks them on out, and so, you know, therefore I didn't expect it to be mirror polished and absolute, you know, super smooth finish on the handles and everything. Those are things I can do myself. So what we started with, and on both of these, Kylie finished knowing that I'd be probably mirror finishing this one. Kylie ground this one a little finer than he normally does, but I'll try to get this in the light. And can you see that in the viewfinder, Mary, at all? If you can see the serrations here are going down. Since our initial grinding is going this way, we're going to start our initial sanding going in this direction. And I don't switch. A lot of people will tell you, and I think they're correct, that if you sand in this direction with one sandpaper, you know, on the next one you might go to 45, and that will instantly show any lines. My trick for that is I will sand with a given paper. I will go to the next smaller grit, and when I go to the next grit and hit it for just a second, if there's lines left from the from two sanding grits back, they will immediately pop out, show up, and you know to go back to the paper that you were on. Depending on how rough this finish is, when you finished it with your, you might have draw filed it, you might have sanded it already to a fairly high level. That will determine what paper you start with. And I have everything from 150, 180, 220. And I think right now my highest is 2,500. And basically all I do is start with the smoothest grit that I can use to get out whatever lines were left from grinding, from the manufacturing process. As soon as I have a completely even finish across the whole blade, and we're getting there on this blade on this side. This right now is about a 2000 grit finish, and I'll try to bring that up to the camera. And no, man, what's it doing? Hang on, we got we're trying to get the lighting a little better here for you. Okay, and I'm receiving directions here. So okay, so that will show what the finish is at that stage. I started this particular knife with 320 grit because the finish that that John Greco left probably was a 340 grit, somewhere in that neighborhood. And here's one of my little tricks. I buy this matting, and you can get this anywhere. It comes in a little roll like this, and it's the non-slip matting that you use. You can line drawers with it. People do different things in the kitchen with it, and it works absolutely great here because I can position the knife however I want it, take my sandpaper, and I have both hands free to work. Now, one of the tools that I'm going to cover right here, when we think of tools, we think of power tools and motors and cords and belts and wheels and different things. But I've laid out some of my most useful tools right here. And there's little pieces of micarta, pieces of wood, popsicle sticks, I'm not sure what that is anymore, maybe ebony, and you can see there's various shapes, This little French curve here works really nice. And with backing like this, and Tim covered this in one of his videos, with backing like this, and I use lots of little bits of sandpaper, you can sand much harder, and you get going much quicker than if you do it by hand. And when you're, especially at the early stages, when you're taking out the deeper grooves, use backing like this, and a curve like this, for instance. Now, this is not squared off here. If it was, I'd use this end to get right up there, get right up in that corner, like that. If you use a you know, a more of a transition there, so you don't have a square corner, then you're going to use the round end of your little French curve here, we'll call it, with the sandpaper on it. And you can get up in there, and you can cut these with just a plain hand coping saw. You know, here's another little one that works great. You can use this either way to get up in there. Just take a small piece of paper, wrap it around the end. Obviously I'd tear it to the right width, and then I can get up there and get those little bitty corners, which are the hardest places to get. As I get to the end, I'm not concerned as I'm removing gouges with going back and forth, going in one direction. I sand in both directions, and you may get some wavy lines, you may get what they call little fish hooks. At this point, you're not really concerned with that. All you're concerned with is just taking out the scratches. Once we get all the scratches removed to the final grit that you're going to use, then you can start sanding in one direction only, and you want to go as straight as you can, just like that. And let's see, what do we have here? This is 2500, so I could do a brush finish with this. I find though that that's a little fine for a brush finish. I actually like about 320 for a couple of reasons for a brush finish. Why? Well, reason number one, it's much faster to redo if you mess it up. Reason number two, when you get these really smooth and polished like this, as you use them cutting on stuff, it will actually wear away that finish a little too fast, and you'll get smooth streaks and have to touch it up more. So from a practicality standpoint, 320 is a good stopping place for a brush finish. And you can wrap a popsicle stick in there, hold it down, and go. So basically that's the steps that you're going to follow. Again, to review, good non-slip surface. Always be careful of the edge. We've got sharp things here, so you're always conscious of where that edge is, where your fingers are, and you're always watching that. You're going to start with the smoothest paper that you can start with to remove whatever sanding grits are left. You're going to go in the opposite direction of the sanding grit, of the belt marks, and you're going to completely remove it. And here's a trick, is make sure you completely remove one set of sanding marks before you go to the next grit. I think that where people end up with bad finishes is because they get in a hurry. This is something to do maybe while you're sitting in the evening listening to music. You're not in any rush. Take as much time as you need. It's your knife, and I want to see what it looks like finished. So well, yeah, I pretty much got that, and I'll come back, and then they go to the next finest grit, they go to the next finest grit, and then the next finest grit, and they get down to where they think they're done, but when you hold it up in the light, well, you start noticing a little mark here, there's a line there, and so really take your time on that. Now, another thing to check, I have a light on an arm here, and you know, it's just a strong, good incandescent light, and it will really pop out any marks that might be on there. And I check frequently. I work when I get close down. I usually switch from using any of the tools, and I go back to just hand sanding. And when I get right down to the end, and I'm basically at this point, everything's smooth, and I'll be prepping it for polish. If I'm going to go past a brush finish and we're going to polish it now, I will take a digit size, a finger piece size of paper, but always enough where I can fold it over, because that gives me a piece that will hold on my finger, and then I can really hit this, and I have no idea what grit that is there. I think this is probably a little heavier than one I was using. But now I can really go across the blade and get into every little crack and crevice, and this will give me a nice, pretty even finish all the way across there. And usually when I'm done, one way you could, if you're ever at my house, one way you can tell that I'd be almost done with your knife is there'll be a big pile of these little pieces everywhere. And when I sand, when I get down close to the edge here, I usually tip the knife a little bit so that blade edge is down almost in that foam. I've never been cut this way. I'm extra careful out at the tip so that I don't jab the thing into my finger. And now if you have a workbench and you don't have something like this, remember that, let's say that I didn't have that and I just had this desktop, and it's there's grit, there's crud in it. So if I get one side nice and pretty and then I lay it down on here, working on this side, that's going to be moving on there, and whatever grit, crud, stone, you name it that's in there, it's going to start scratching gouges in here, and we're back to square one. So take an old piece of cotton, a shop rag, a sponge. I've used a lot of things, and lay this on it. A sponge, I think, for a beginner works pretty well, because you can lay it in it and kind of bury that edge in the sponge. There's not much danger at all that you would ever cut yourself, and then you can sand on it. So really, basically, the only tools that you need for this are little jigs that you can design yourself. These are just ones that I've used over time that work good for me. I have others. Some elbow grease, a strong light. Again, I like these little mats to hold everything in place so it doesn't move while I'm working on it. You can also clamp this. I think if you look at Tim's video when he was doing initial sanding and putting a brush finish on his knife, that's a great jig there, a great idea. I do recommend that you get you know, don't skimp on getting sandpaper, and get, when I say sandpaper, please understand that I mean emery paper like this, what most people commonly refer to as wet or dry paper. Actual sandpaper is made for wood. It really doesn't work well on metal, and it's just not going to do a very good job for you, and it doesn't last any time. This stuff doesn't last that long. But I would get you know, a good assortment of that. It's not that expensive. You can buy individual sheets. If you can find it, 3,000 or 3,500, you really don't need much past that. As you get down to where you want to put the mirror polish on your blade, for instance, you'll start out with a brand new piece of 3,000 and just wear it out and keep sanding with it. I've also, because it's wet or dry, when I get it way down there and I've got the sandpaper pretty well wore out, I'll put a few drops of water on there and wet sand, and that will make it even finer to the point where you can get a pretty good mirror polish on your blade just from that. So let's cut for a second, and we'll go down to the shop, and we're going to pick it up down there, and I'm going to show you some just little you know, things that you can make to get that final bit of mirror polish if you want to make a buffer or something like that. So we'll pick it up down there.